Damn it, Dale.
Yo, the show. Intro music. Here we are. Dale Saran here with my buddy, the guy, the one and only Jake Parent. Hey, this is going to be a fun one. You're going to like this. I know you'll like this topic, and we've kind of kicked this one around before, you and I have. But the overarching theme for this week is: can you do good while you're doing bad? And I'll explain. We'll put context on what I mean by that. But this will be, and the example, the kind of stepping off point will be, because it was a historic week. So I gotta talk about this. I feel obligated to, because it's kind of, for you and I both, we're both, Gen X, big time Gen Xers. And this kind of hangs over our generation. And that's the JFK assassination. It happened in 63. And then I was born in 69. What are you, 70?
72.
72. So this was, just not even 10 years old, the Kennedy assassination was. It was a huge part of the kind of pre-story when we both arrive on the scene. I know it informed a lot of stuff about my parents and just our view of the world. So the JFK files came out this week. And we're going to do all of this. We're going to talk CIA a little bit. And so we're going to talk Coffee and COVID had a pretty good article. And then America This Week, they talked about it. Walter Kern had a great way, and he's been a long time JFK, like he's followed this and I think written about this kind of a bit. And he had an interesting, Matt Taibbi asked him about, his thoughts and what he's seen. And he brought up some interesting things that Jeff Childers didn't. So we'll talk JFK files released by the Trump administration, unredacted, I might add, like not big lines of black text, like dear black text. Nice to black text, you know what I mean? No, it was actually unredacted. They dropped like 80,000 pages of docs, and it's online. It's in a searchable thing. I haven't had enough time to go. I'm just going to wait for the hive mind to work on it. But we'll talk that, and I'll say sort of my entree into all of this is to blow my cover a little bit, and to at this point I don't think it matters. I was only in for a very short time, but I feel like I'm obligated to say this because I'm not speaking as an outsider. I worked at the Puzzle Palace. I used to, I had a favorite place to park in the agency parking lot, just like every other pogue who works there. So watching the agency implode I have interesting mixed emotions about it, because I had friends who worked there. I mean, and maybe still do. I don't know. I've lost touch with all of them really. But I'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll kind of run through this. In some ways, this is tied to sovereignty. It's an interesting issue with the JFK files. If the CIA, in fact, whacked the president of the United States, I mean, we're not living what we think we've been living. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk all of that. So we'll jump right in. America This Week. Jay, why don't you pull up? Walter Kern they had America This Week. And they do a transcript, which I really like. It's kind of nice of the podcast. I wish we had that capability, although I don't know if we can justify it with all 35 listeners. But
we have that many?
I know, up to 3,000 already. And so, but there's a great Walter Kern talked about, some of what he saw in the JFK files. Have you had a chance to look at any of that, read anything about it? Have you seen anything?
I haven't read any of the files yet. I too am waiting for the weaponized autism to get cracking on it and come back with anything useful. And it's I'll let you take it away from there. I am suspect that the story that we have been fed is.
Yeah, so that's the best thing to come out of it now. Here's what I thought Walter did a great job of. So far, nobody's come running out. Here's the smoking gun. Here's the memo where, the director of the CIA, I think it was Colby at the time or whatever, told, Oswald to whack the president or whatever. There's nothing like that. And I think it would be stupid to expect that there would be anything like that when you're talking about assassinating the president. But here's what I'll say.
Well, if the CIA is involved, I have not been as closely involved with them as you have, but if they were involved, there would be a company in Panama that owns another company somewhere else that contracts with somebody that has a knockout.
Yes.
That would then go talk to Oswald.
Well, and so what's funny about it is a lot of the files are exactly what you just said, which is to say, it's all this surrounding web of so far, and this is just what I've seen, and just kind of scanning, going there, looking. Some other people have already started going through it. But I'll tell you what Walter said that I thought was great. The one thing he pointed to, and they had some copies of this up, was the Arthur Schlesinger memo to JFK in like 1963. Schlesinger, and I forget what his position was in the Kennedy administration, but he basically, this came out of kind of the agency. There was this like 690 something page report where the agency had done on itself, and they were like, wow, it's really out of control. Like, people are making operational decisions and nobody's talking to anybody. And like, the agency had done this, their whole thing. Now, here's the funny thing about this. The FBI, what these files show is the FBI got a copy of that report, which is to say the FBI got a copy of the CIA's own internal, like, look at what they're doing for operations. And the FBI looks at it, and what do you think they say when the CIA in the report is admitting people are out of control, they're doing wacky shit. Nobody's getting permission from the chief of wherever, or the president, and they're just doing shit out there on behalf of, theoretically on behalf of the U.S. government, but shit that nobody even knows. It's like this is its own report, basically the CIA admitting we're a rogue agency. It's out of control, people. I mean, it's doing shit. Schlesinger called it in his memo a state within a state. But in any event, the FBI gets a copy of this report, and what do you think they conclude as a result of looking at all this crazy shit? The CIA. Oh, one of the things is the CIA.
We should do the same thing.
Yes, of course. Of course.
Nobody else has to ask mom for permission. I'm not asking.
Exactly. It's so good. It's so beautiful. So the FBI reads of the CIA's malfeasance, and I mean things like, they're reading the mail. They had an op going with the Postal Service, with the head of the post office, and the CIA would come and they could read whatever they wanted. So anybody who was corresponding with the Soviet Union, the CIA was reading their mail. They were opening film canisters, all kinds of crazy shit, right? And the FBI reads this, all this CIA malfeasance, and they're like, they basically, their memo that's in there is a response to that memo, is basically, how do we get in on this? And almost like, how do we blackmail the CIA with its own admitted malfeasance? Like, how can we lever that to get ourselves so we can get in on the action? I mean, it's as bad as you could possibly imagine. No, here's the thing. Here's what I think that's great about it. And this goes back to like what we talked about, truth-seeking endeavors. And again, I want to say all of this in the context of the overarching theme is, can you do good? Can it be possible to be doing bad things, but it's doing good? In other words, can the CIA justify itself and the FBI under the guise of, whether it's terrorism or it was the main enemy, which is what the Soviet Union was known as for a long time, and the Cold War stuff? Can you be doing lying, cheating, and stealing, reading people's mail, violating civil rights, and yet, on the other hand, saying, but hey, it's for a greater good. It's for a larger cause. We got to do this. This is just how it has to be. So I'll just lob that out to you. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is it possible to do that?
I think it is. I doubt they are.
I think I can think of hypothetical examples, but these ain't them.
Well, it is one of those things where the organization would have to be much smaller. There would have to be some accountability somewhere, but there is a you need to have people who are willing to do bad things, and sometimes in the name of a good cause. I personally don't believe that the CIA is a good cause. I think that there are elements of the CIA, of the FBI, of the Department of Justice, of government in general, that are anti-American. At their core. Yeah, so it doesn't matter what they do at that point. They are a force for anti-Americanism.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, there's an interesting thing and Mark Twain wrote a piece, and I think it's one of the most brilliant satires. It's called Corn Pone Opinions, and it appeared in I forget where originally in his writings, but it became kind of famous. It's written from the perspective of a slave who's telling a younger white kid. It's almost like a kind of a Huck Finn kind of situation.
Right.
With Jim. But it's kind of like that. It's a slave, but he's got all these wisdoms. And in fact, that was a notable aspect that people miss about Twain's writing is that the best person in everything in Twain are the slaves, or the black people.
Well,
The smartest ones. And by the way,
but he called him the N-word, so we can't have that
right.
right.
So we got to erase that. Yeah, which is a terrible thing. By the way, a lot of Twain's stuff in that regard follows a long and an ancient tradition. Like slavery obviously has been around forever. And the Greeks had slaves, the Romans had slaves, and you can find in both Greek and Roman drama of the day, you can find plays where the owners, like rich slave owners, are depicted as licentious turds, and the slaves are virtuous and smart. And there were many. It was so common that it was a trope that, you had this sort of the people who were in charge, who were the slave owners, who were idiots, undeserving, elites in some way. And you had these sort of slaves who had no status or low status and were obviously smarter, better, made things run, were the whole, had the real wisdom behind all of it. And so Twain was following in a long tradition in that regard of satire. But he called them corn-pone opinions, and it came down to, you can't get a man to have a point of view that runs counter to what provides his corn-pone, his, how he makes his living. And I'll tell you that you can find, it doesn't matter what it is. And I had this person, sort of now out myself a little bit. I'll mix this in some stories here. When I was at the agency, one of the things that I found, I thought, having been in the Marine Corps, and I thought the Marine Corps is the Marine Corps is only 175,000 to 200,000 people. By some definitions, it's a special force, but not really. It's a little too big for that. But, the Marine Corps is as small as it is. And I thought the Marine Corps was I was pretty frustrated with a lot of bureaucratic bullshit, that just comes along with the military. So when I left the Marine Corps and I went to the agency, I thought we're going to be elite, man. There's going to be none of that bullshit. We're going to be lean and mean. And they're going to have any of that shit because, hey, man, we're the CI of fucking A, baby, And so I had in my head this kind of romanticized notion of what it was going to be like. And then reality intruded. I had to get a passport in an alias. I had to get a passport. And you need to do some paperwork. And I needed this for an operation, and I needed to travel. And there was some, there were people up on different floors or wherever you went to do this. We handled this kind of stuff, this paperwork. And they're just GS8 chat ladies in muumuus, and they've got top secret clearances or whatever. And you're they're just federal employees, baby, and you're at their whim. And so I needed to go somewhere. I had to drop off the paperwork, and then I was going to be gone for 5 days. I was going to some training and doing some other shit, and so I just needed to make sure this I needed to come back, and I was going to need for this shit to be done, Yeah. And I came to her, they're I go, where do you go? And somebody's well, you go up and you go, and this is where you go, and this is the office, and go in this vault, and this is the desk you go to, cube number, whatever. And I went up there looking for this person, and there's nobody there, and I'm waiting around 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I'm what the fuck? And so then I'm I look, and there's an office kind of back at the bottom, and it looks like maybe it must be a supervisor office, I don't know. And I go in there, and I'm and she's oh, can I help you? I'm yeah, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm, got some operational shit going on, and I need this paperwork to make its way, kind of through. And the long and the short of it is, it becomes basically well, that's Wilma's job. And I'm okay, well, is Wilma here? And it's a Wednesday, and she's well, Wilma's not, I think she's got tomorrow and Friday off. And it's basically fuck off, we can't help you. And I'm hey, aren't we the premier fucking spy agency in the world or whatever? And I'm basically stymied. My operation hinges on Wilma getting fucking paperwork done. And I very quickly found out that the agency is staffed by lots of federal employees who are part of the federal employees union, and they don't give two fucks about your operations or what you need to get done. They'll get to it when they fucking get to it. And I remember being oh my God, in the Marine Corps, we would never, that would never happen. Operations uber alles. You know what I mean? If you came in and it was hey, I need my travel claim done, the clerk, if that Lance Corporal didn't, like, 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 like he'd be at office hours, but not you
Right.
can't do that at the agency, And so all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, it dawns on me like we're at the fucking mercy of these people. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't work the other way. It was an eye opener.
Well,
There are a lot of things.
it's these kind of stories that like when people are like, oh, Wilma's going to lose her job. Wah. Wah.
Right. Well, yeah. So that's part of what I wanted to talk about. Here's for those who are watching this, like, oh my God.
Unfortunately, it'll never be Wilma that loses her job. It'll be somebody that actually shows up, does their job. They'll get shit canned.
It'll be something,
and the absolute barnacle attached to the side of the ship gets to keep going. But
yeah. So these JFK files, I think Walter had to come back to what Walter said about it is these are just the first releases. Like we need to think about these, and that's why it's almost too early to have an opinion about it yet. Because like he said, there's still thousands more documents to come. And remember that this was supposed to cover not just JFK files, but the shooting of RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, his brother, and Martin Luther King. Yeah. And some of the Martin Luther King stuff's kind of trickled out, but there's much more to come. And so I think this is like, this is like a mosaic, or it's like a puzzle where, we haven't even flipped over all the pieces yet and we certainly don't have the cover of the box to look at, to go by. Right. Instead, we've just got naked pieces, you know what I mean, everywhere. It's like, okay, we don't even know what the corners are yet, where the frame is. But I think over time, these additional revelations, my hope is that this will be the beginning of, you've been hard on the boomers, and this might be the end of the boomer era. Like with the publication of all this JFK stuff, it almost brings a close to it, because nobody who comes after now, our generation or, millennials or whatever they're calling, Zoomers and what comes next, they now will not grow up in a world where there was this, this kind of bullshit hearing. What was the investigate? Was it the Church Committee, or they were the ones who did the investigation? They did the CIA stuff. What was the one that did? No, the Warren Commission did the JFK. Warren Commission. Which, by the way, I mean, that's another great one, another doozy. Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA, was on the Warren Commission. I mean, there's a ton of things.
We need the fox to sit on the commission of what's happening to these chickens.
Yeah, I mean, it all looks now like very, very different. But
also, if Colonel Sanders could join our blue ribbon panel of these chicken disappearances, that'd be great.
It's unbelievable. But I think that there's more to come out, and so it's early to make judgments. But the one thing that comes out of it is like, holy shit, the CIA had its hand in everything. Everything. A lot of the stuff, the domestic, all kinds of domestic stuff, student protests. I mean, agencies' hands are in everything. Everything. Domestic. The stuff specifically they're not supposed to be doing. That's against their charter.
What?
I know. And by the way, what's interesting for me is having worked there for a very short time, I should say, just during the War on Terror, during the early part.
You're not a plant at all, is what you're trying to tell us.
Yeah. No, I'm saying, none of that. Like, it is so compartmentalized. It is so much like that. I mean, and the other part of it was, I was part of the class. We were the first post 9/11 class. That I was one of the idiots who ran down, believed it all. The whole 9/11 thing. Go get Bin Laden. And so we were, those of us who got recruited. There was a cadre of us, a chunk of us they knew from when they recruited us that we weren't going to be like, I wasn't going to be doing China operations.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they didn't come there. Like we all knew when I got in.
Yeah. You weren't there for 20 years and a gold watch at the end. You're like,
right.
And there were
yeah, there were a bunch of us who were hired like that, and we all were friends and hung out. It was, a lot of former mill guys. And so we were like, I was operational for most of the time I was there. Like I would come back. This is a funny story. Every time I would come back from Afghanistan, I would be gone, and I would come back. And it was during this, like I first joined was right after 9/11. And so I got through the program, and then boom, I'm headed to the field. And they were changing the names of offices so fast that between trips, I would come back to the building, the agency at like 11 o'clock at night, land at Dulles, off a plane from Afghanistan, just from Kabul, dragging my shit behind me. I still got the dust in my boots. from Afghanistan. And one time I came to the agency, I came up to the vault that used to be my office, and it's like totally, I'm like, I'm trying to punch the code and nothing. And I'm looking around, it's got a different name now. And I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm like, and so I'm not, and somebody's like, hey, can I help you? I'm like, I
live here.
This is my office. And they're like, no, you're not here anymore. I'm like, what? I'm like, when did that happen? They're like, 6 weeks ago. I've been gone for months. And they're like, yeah, you're up and back and down there. And I'm like, what? And that happened to me. Like we would joke about it. All the guys I worked with, who Pat Skinner among them, which by the way, we can flash this up. This is part of my justification. Flash this up, Jay, is my buddy, Pat. So if anybody's like, hey, how can you talk about this? You were in and blah, blah, blah. So this is this guy, Pat Skinner right here. He had a whole piece done on him in April of 2018. Like a New Yorker spread. I think he's in Vanity Fair, and you can find him out. He's like, they call him a CIA analyst, which is funny because he fucking definitely was not an analyst. He was a case officer. But he's a cop in Savannah, Georgia, when this piece was done, and he and I served together in Afghanistan. But more than that, we had come in through the whole pipeline together. So he's a former Coast Guard rescue diver who then was a air marshal right after 9/11 while he was applying to the agency. And so we used to sit right next to each other, hang out, good friends. We both went to Afghanistan together. So it's hard for me to be like, Pat's got a spread in the New Yorker, but I can't talk about what I did. Get the fuck out of here,
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, and more importantly, like there's this kind of weird thing where, I have things like I have disclosure obligations, and I've got obligations as an attorney. Like when I applied to the Arizona bar, for example, you got to fill out like all your, employment information. Like, what am I going to put the cover company that I worked for? And on penalty of perjury, you get like they'll pull your bar card, if you lie to the bar on your application. So like, what am I going to say? Like I call the agency, I'm like, hey, can I, I write them a letter. They don't respond. I'm like, oh, fuck you guys. I'm not going to lie to the bar on your behalf. Sorry. And so there's this weird kind of dance. And the other part was the company that I had been associated with had years ago, had been blown as a CIA drop, front. So like, what am I going to put that on my bar application and get fucking screwed, get hosed by the bar? I'm like, no, I'm not. Anyway.
I think this is one of those things that the only way you get screwed is if the deep state decides they don't like you anymore. Yeah. And then it doesn't matter what you answered on anything.
Right.
You're guilty.
Yeah. Well, the good news now is they got much bigger problems, which is it looks to me.
That warms my little heart.
Like my boys are coming unglued. It looks, and that's part of what I see in all of this is this all looks like a presage to, I don't know, nuking the agency to blowing it up. I mean, now in light of everything we now know, from Snowden to the NSA is reading everybody's emails, but guess what? They were doing it. They were reading your mail. The CIA was doing it back in the 60s, as it turns out. So like, at what point do we all going to just like grow up and kind of go, yeah, if you any of this, any power that you will be abused, anything.
Like you can stop wrapping yourself in the flag. Your wings need to be clipped. And that was one of the things that I had sent you with the podcast that I'd said to listen to. One of the fundamental points of it was that the more righteousness that we imbue a relationship, an organization with, the more corrupt they become.
Yeah,
like there's just an inverse relationship between like, oh, the Holy Catholic Church and they're a bunch of pedophiles. Crap.
Right. As it turns out, and there it is.
And we love our police force, and they're a bunch of abusers. Well, right. Like, there probably hasn't been a much bigger turn in my life than from my view of the police as largely good, largely a force for good. Hey, maybe there's a couple bad apples here and there. Like the advent of video cameras, like the police haven't figured it out fast enough. Like, hey, you're being videotaped all the time. And like the amount of malfeasance and corruption and just ill behavior is staggering. It's like, wow, you are not, this is not a bad apple. The saying is one bad apple spoils the bunch.
Yes.
The bunch is spoiled.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. People forget that part.
And it seems that way writ large with with government agencies.
I'll give you a great example of that I had a direct, kind of while in Afghanistan and then coming home. And it was an eye opener for me, which was, so I'm over in Afghanistan and I was way out in the hinterlands looking for bin Laden, and like everybody else kicking over rocks. He's not here, And oh no, bin Laden, he's not here, looking for him.
Looked in this cave, not there.
Right, looking around. Well, anyway, I'm catching a ride. It's near the end of my hitch, this one hitch, and I've been in country now for a while, and so I was pretty I was at a far out base, but I was hitching a ride in a helicopter, and I had to coordinate this, with leadership and all that. But I caught a ride where I was going by a base where a buddy of mine, a good friend, a classmate, we'd been roommates for a while. And so I caught a helicopter to stop by his base a day early, hang out with him. And then we were both going home on leave at the same time. And it was all coordinated with, a boss and all that shit. So I landed his base, and he's doing some other things that I'm not read into. It's his base, but I'm an old kind of Afghan hand by this time. I've been around a while. And he says, hey, we're doing an op. You want to come by the talk tonight? I'm like, whatever. No, he's like, no, you can come by. Everybody knows, you'll be cool. So I go by, because this was a big base that had other people and other things. So I went by the little agency area, and go into their talk, and there's the boss and, other people. I'm like, hey, and they're all like, hey. So they're briefing an operation that they're doing. My buddy's like, hey, we're going to do this op tonight, and then we'll catch a ride, tomorrow we'll go into Kabul, and boom, we're going to fly home. So right on. So I'm sitting around, leaning against the wall, just watching this thing take place. And I'm listening to them brief the concept of the operations. And the guy the way he's briefing it and explaining it, they're going to snatch a bad guy who's coming in to Afghanistan from Pakistan. And so he's a legit bad guy. We're going to do this snatch and coordinating it from where we are. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Right on, kind of cool, fun to watch. And when they're briefing it, it becomes clear to me the first time the guy says something, I'm like, how are they going to do that? Like, he's just describing how they're going to get this guy. He's in a car. And then the second time he explains another aspect of it, it becomes clear to me that the only way this operation makes any fucking sense, the only way they can be doing what they're doing is if they've got real-time live cell phone intercept of this guy. And you got to remember, this is at a time before it was widely, now we just take it for granted, but this was back before this had been exposed. So at the time, I was standing against the wall, and all of a sudden, my friend was across from me, my buddy, and he must have noticed, he saw my eyes kind of like, he must have read something in my face. Like, and then I could see, I looked at him and he looked at me, and our eyes did this. He was like, oh, you didn't know. And I was like, the fuck, I didn't know, And I could see him looking at me like, oh shit, you weren't read in on this, and just, it made a lot of lights go off for me. A lot of other things I had been doing. Suddenly I was like, oh, that makes sense. So I get to see a little bit of the bigger picture. And nobody, it didn't matter, whatever, but I wasn't read into that program. So a couple of years later, after I had left and I was back practicing law, I saw there was a bunch of cases, and there was a big, New York Times, Washington Post expose. This is in 2007 or something, I think, 06, 7, 8, somewhere in there, where it's they're a bunch of, some defendants were suing because the DEA was doing, and they named the technology, I forget what it was called, but they were doing live, dragon, or it was some kind of.
It was like Raptor or Dragon.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And it was the DEA was using it live, cell phone intercepting people on U.S. citizens and so it's it was one thing to see it used, out over in Pakistan and think to yourself or Afghanistan and think, well, of course, we're doing this to get terrorists. And then to come home a few years later and see it being used as a domestic law enforcement tool. And I was like, uh-oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
And this again, we'll ask this in the question of, can you do good while you're doing bad? And I'm going to suggest that there really is no, that you can't do that. That there isn't, that the ends can never justify the means. That the means have to justify themselves. And so if you're torturing people because you're like, oh no, a bomb's going to go off, and you want to live in the Jack Bauer world, you just want an excuse to rip people's fingernails off. Dress that up a million different ways, but what it comes down to is you want an excuse to rip somebody's fingernails off.
I think I'm going to come at this from a different point of view. I think if you are, there's no way that you can organize, put that into an organization and have that ethos trickle down. And by the ethos trickle down of we do the right, basically the mindset of the chaotic good. You're not going to like the process, but you will like the result, which is largely my mindset.
I think no, I think
So,
you have to be
but hold
more.
on a second. So what I'm getting to is that like Sam Harris and Immanuel Kant both have the thing of don't ever tell a lie, which is the position that you're basically taking, is that there is no point at which you can use subterfuge or deceit.
I don't know about subterfuge or deceit. I mean, I think
But that is
part of it is how we
part
define
of,
good. Yeah, part of the
yeah,
problem is what do you define good and bad as? And I
right.
recognize in there,
And,
but
and that always brings down to the moral question of like, when it comes to Kant's don't ever tell a lie, the Nazis are at the door and they want to know where the Jews are. Kant and Sam Harris's view is your best alternative is to just remain silent.
I think that's an easy lie. I think that's an easy one. I don't think that's a. I think you can. I don't think you're doing bad.
Yeah, well, but the
You know
the
what I mean?
people on but the people on the other side who are actually in control of the government do think you're doing bad. That you are committing a misdeed, and it's like what? Well, how do we determine morality?
Yeah, I mean, you are.
And many people in the CIA, like when we overthrew shortly after World War II, we overthrew the Italian government, and then we
We
overthrew
threw a
the
shit. Overthrew a shit.
Guatemalan government.
That's
It's
what
like
comes
no,
out of this as well. These
that
files are like,
we
what
were
didn't
doing
we
good
overthrow?
things.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's literally how we get the term banana republic, is
yeah.
Guatemala, and they're bananas in the CIA. So how do you, how much agent, everybody always wants to like, hey, we believe in the First Amendment and free speech until you say things we disagree with,
Yeah, of course.
or you're just wrong. And everybody is like, hey, I allow you free agency. I always joke that the people on the left want to give people, hey, you're free to do whatever you want as long as it's not a mistake. Like we can't allow you,
What
we
if,
can't allow you to do anything where you might have a negative outcome. And
well,
it's
there are parents. I mean, there are people, and I think this is part of parenting in many ways was where this kind of where you learned how, at least I think our generation, our parents kind of were the hands off, like you'll figure it out, less is more kind of thing.
right,
Whereas I think we went through this whole like, well, I can't let you do anything that might potentially have an outcome that's adverse to you, the sort of plastic wrap.
right.
You,
Well,
you
that
know,
is that is you have the tyrannical father, which is overbearing,
right.
and demanding, but you also have the devouring mother is like overprotective, over nurturing,
Yeah.
overdoing things. And I've talked to a lot of people. It's like, well, my kid won't try anything new and he won't leave the house. It's like, well, like you said, you bubble wrapped him his whole life, never let him make a mistake. So what do you? He's afraid to make a mistake.
Right. He's 16 years old and he can't make himself a sandwich, or whatever.
So when it comes to the CIA and like, is there a way that you can do a good thing with bad means? It would have to be. I could see where you could, where the president goes, "Hey, we're going to put together a platoon of 12 guys. We've got intelligence, operations. We have the thing. Your job is to get this thing done, and then when you're done, we disband it."
Yeah. In many ways, it's a question that was
And
asked.
there's also just a lack of transparency in government in general, where like I don't know. You may know this better than I do. What are the what skill set does somebody need to have to put a, hey, this is top secret on information? Hey, we're going to document this, and then we're going to stamp it top secret, and not let you know.
The interesting thing is, I mean, the president is the ultimate. He is the top classification authority. He's the head of the entire classification system, president of the United States.
Mhm.
And then it flows down, and there are people who are given the authority to be classification authorities, and then there's all these regulations. I mean, everything's massively over classified. That's another aspect of all of this is there's a shit ton of stuff, and you go, can we have a secret organization? Can you have a secret spy organization in a republic like ours that's built on, the First Amendment and all the things we believe?
I think you can, but it would have to be much leaner than what we have.
Yeah, they're about
99% leaner than what
they're about to get a lot leaner. I mean,
well, I love a good conspiracy theory.
I love it all.
I don't believe them most of the time. Would it be possible for a president in the past to sign an executive order that keeps information from future presidents?
Yeah, that's it. No, I would say not. I would say that one's void on its face. I would think. Okay. And I wouldn't think there'd be like, hey, classified. But I mean, you can put things in programs and lock them up in such a way and bury them in bureaucratic bullshit so far that, like, how many presidents know everything that's going on? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, how many CEOs of companies know everything?
Even know, right?
Right. If you've got 1,000 employees, the chances that like there is something taking place in your company that you don't know about is pretty high.
It's 100%. There's guys beating their wives that you're like, I don't approve of that. You know what? Right. It's happening. Right. You know what I mean? In any organization of any size, there's all kinds of shit that you don't want happening that you wouldn't support. The guy's a drunk. This guy's a drug addict. No, I don't support any of that. But you have any group of 40,000 people, that shit's going on at some number.
Correct.
In some percentage. So this is all coming unglued. And I'm going to bring this up and tell you one other sort of reveal. And it's going to be my last agency story will be this. When I was leaving there, I gave my notice and I was like, all right, I fucking had it. I had seen enough. It didn't take me too long to figure out. I had seen enough of the clown show. And I was on my way out the door. And this was during what people know as there was a renditions program where people at the agency were snatching people off the streets in foreign countries and then sending them. And these are terror suspects. And then they were sending them to countries that we had agreements with, like, who knows, like Morocco or some other places where human rights were maybe not quite as carefully observed. And we would turn over, suspected terrorists to these other intelligence services where they will start putting pointy, sharp objects into your body until you start talking. They have no conscience. Waterboarding will be the least of your problems if these people get hold of you. You're keeping all of your body parts intact will be of primacy in your concerns. So I was about to leave, and somebody I knew, who I had good professional relationship with and looked up to, liked, heard about my resignation, reached out to me on the last day I was there, called me into their office, and this was a person in a relatively senior position to me, and they asked me if I wanted to join the renditions team. And which is to be part of the snatch team. So go overseas, be part of the street, follow some guy, find him and stick a hood over his head, tackle him, throw him in the back of a van, and take him, chuck him on a plane, and, like kind of like A-Team kind of shit, or like you see in movies, And so I got asked if I wanted to be on it, and I knew at least two people who were people I was good friends with, and so I had been recommended. And the person asked me, and I was like, I was a lawyer at the time, but I had been a case officer. And now I'm like, I'm getting ready to leave, and I'm transitioning out. I'm going to go back to the practice law. And I remember saying, hey, listen, I just want you to know, thank you. I'm very flattered. It's a very kind offer, but no. And I want you to remember this day that when it goes bad, and it will go bad, I just want you to remember that I told you that today. And then I was like, I'm out. See ya. I was like, what? Eject. Right. I was like, and so I come to this question of, can you do good while you're doing it bad? I have a concern that I think maybe that is a little strange and a little off, but it's this. I think people ignore or pretend it doesn't matter what happens to the souls of the people who have to carry out the dragging people off the streets and putting hoods over their heads.
Well, I think that
I have a concern that maybe he's a little esoteric. Maybe
that's probably one of the points that I wanted to make earlier that I got a little sidetracked with, which is, hey, we're going to go do this bad thing. Here's the penalty for doing that bad thing. Here's the good outcome if we do it. Are you still going to do it? Yeah, I'm willing to pay the price for that.
Yeah.
And if, there are far too often in our society, there are people who think, oh, I'm just going to be involved in this cost-free transaction where I do this nefarious thing,
right?
And nothing bad will happen to me. As it turns out, I've been in a few conflicts, and physically, emotionally, morally, spiritually, before I'm going to be involved in conflict with someone, whether it's legal or not legal. One of the questions I have to ask is, how much are you willing to suffer for this?
Yeah.
Like, are you just willing to outsuffer the other person to make a point? And often, like if you tell some of these people, hey, you're going to go snatch this guy, we think this is the good that it'll do for America, you may end up in prison for 10 years.
Right.
Just like point blank, cost of doing business. Are you going to still do business or not? And there's some people who are going to go, yeah, I believe in this morally strong enough that I will go do that. And then there's other people, it's like, well, no, I only thought it was cool when I got to be the A team and snatch people and I got to be the big hammer. But if someone else has a hammer, I don't want to play the game anymore.
Well, so as it turns out, people may or may not remember, but long after I was gone, there was a huge investigation, big blow up. Mm-hmm. They did a snatch in Italy. So they were doing this in countries that we have, like, allies, and they did a snatch in Italy, and Italy's intelligence service was like, what? Qua? They were pissed. And like, you snatch some guy off the streets.
You think you're the Mossad?
Yeah. And right. And so it didn't take them long to trace to who it was. And what I mean? Like, this was back before things were anything like they are now, now we've all got the tracking device on us. I mean, I can't even imagine. At least I was like 20 years ago when that was just starting. So anyway, these guys are like,
as it turns out, the number of people with that kind of skill set is rather small. The rounding up of the usual suspects is not as hard as you think.
Right. So these folks, like, I got a bunch of people I knew, former colleagues, who couldn't, they were done. That was it. They were toast. They were burned. They couldn't go to the EU. So that's it for the rest of their lives. They were now known as like, hey, you were part of this team. It was like however many there were, I forget, a dozen, whatever it was. All had come in different ways, and they had used like burner phones and all that. But every intelligence service now, I mean, it's all just on lockdown.
Yeah,
they know it's only a matter of time, and so these people are all burned, and they got convictions in absentia against them in an Italian court, and that like, oh yeah,
that is the if you did not realize that was the cost of doing, like, early on in Web 1.0, I was a director of a fairly large corporation as a very young person. And somebody had brought this deal to me where we were using a subset of a subset of a subset of a regulation that really didn't technically apply to us, but we were going to be able to sell T1s, which were going for $3,000 at the time, for like 50 cents a mile, which was an unbelievable rate. And then we would just keep the difference. And I was like, in order for this to work, we have to bat 1,000. I've never seen anybody bat 1,000. Let's not do this.
Maybe this is not a good idea.
Yeah, like, are we playing for the short? Like, do we only care about the next 6 months, or how long do we want to play this game? I would like to play this game for years. If you're only want to play for the next 6 months, this is the wrong team for you. And that ended up being the wrong team for him. He went to an organization, and I think they made it 9 months before they got busted, and that there was fallout. Like you said, it's like, how long is your timeline of how long do I want to play this game? Yeah. And if I had looked at that in the time and said, hey, in 3 years this whole thing's going to burn down anyway, who cares?
Right. Maybe I would have thought.
Maybe I'll 6x my money in the next 9 months. But as it turned out, it worked out fine for me in the end. But What kind of game do you want to play? How long do you want to play it? Are you willing to pay the penalties?
Yeah, that's the big one.
That
Yeah.
there are definitely cases where you can, if you had told all those agents going in, hey,
Yeah.
90% chance you're going to get burned and you'll never work again. Is it worth going after this guy for you to burn your career?
Yeah, and of course,
some portion of them are going to say yes.
Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
then
They're
some
not
of them are going to go,
Yeah.
I'd rather get a paycheck next. Like, I'm not that. I'm just here for the check, man.
It's an interesting point. Yeah, you can. It is the difference in part between long-term and short-term thinking.
Yeah.
And part of that applies to the, is it good or is it bad? In many ways, our ethics are dependent on what time lens you're using.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Is it good? Is it bad? But I think
also,
there's
also just being able to figure out the area under the curve of like how many people are impacted at this at what level.
Yeah. So the JFK files, yeah, I would say, and by the way, what's interesting about all of this, kind of relevant and an irony that's not lost on me. You can look this up. Look up what is on the floor of the CIA, what the CIA's motto is, and what's on the floor of the agency logo. Just pull up, see if it says it. What is the agency CIA motto?
The eagle and the shield and the 16-point cross.
Yeah, there's there it is. The more philosophical motto often associated with the agency is, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." That's the CIA credo. And so, it's funny, right? Like here they are. Like here we're looking at the JFK file, and here's the agency's fingerprints on everything, and their unofficial motto is, "And ye shall know the truth," and they're just fucking lying everywhere. I mean,
if you figure all marketing is a lie, like, hey, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. Well, it was definitely your father's Oldsmobile. You shall know the truth, and it shall set you free. It's like, we'll do everything we can to hide the truth from you.
Yes, that should be. There was the NSA guys. I bumped into some NSA guys, and they had their little, clever little motto was, "In God we trust. In God we trust. All others we monitor." And I always thought that was kind of funny, like that's
growing up in the South. It was "In God we trust. Everyone else pays cash."
Right. Like I like that. I got some respect for that. There's a certain wisdom in that, "In God we trust. All others we monitor."
Yes.
Like, all right. But yeah, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So there's an organization that's touting itself as being about getting at the truth, foreign intelligence for the president of the United States. And it turns out that, hey, by the way, one of the other things that comes out of it, and again, history is being rewritten right in front of our eyes, and that's kind of what I'm enjoying. But 4 of the 7, the other thing that's in these documents, 4 of the 7 Watergate burglars were CIA. Two of them were former CIA staff employees, and the other 2 were former contractors. One long term, one a little shorter term. 4 of the 7 Watergate burglars for Nixon were CIA.
That is they need to improve their craft.
But I mean, the whole thing almost starts to look like. I mean, I saw a great thing where, and like, I call this consilience, when different pieces of evidence from different.
Well, Bob Woodward was an asset,
right? And so this is the great part. So, what Bob Woodward wrote. I'm glad you brought his name up. It's exactly where I wanted to go. So Bob Woodward wrote a book about John Belushi. And you know what I'm talking about? What
if you weren't going to bring that up? I was.
Yeah, and Bill Murray's response to that when he read the book,
he was on the Joe Rogan podcast,
and he said he read Wired about John Belushi's the last tumultuous however many things, and Bill Murray said, and who's a wonderful, he's become kind of a cultural uncle. He's like America's uncle. Good natured, kind of wise uncle. Oh, and so he goes. He's like, he said he read Bob Woodward's Wired, Life of John Belushi, completely true story. And he said his first thought was, "Oh my God, they framed Nixon." I was like, what?
Right.
Like, he hasn't even read. He's like, I didn't even read the Nixon stuff. He goes, but as soon as he read what Woodward wrote about John Belushi, something that he knew, his immediate conclusion was, "Oh my God, the guy's a fucking liar." Like complete fiction that there's that, oh my God, they did Nixon. And so the mythology that we have around Nixon is that Nixon, in many ways, and people had said this, and I always thought it sounded crazy because I grew up with a boomer parent who was convinced Nixon was the Antichrist.
Right.
They were the worst thing ever. He was a wildly popular Republican president.
I grew up with dad that thought he got framed.
Oh, interesting. So they were sure you had an OG conspiracy theorist back in the day.
Yeah.
Conspiracy noticer.
Well, it's one of those things where my mind's going blank. I'm trying to find it. There's a theory that whenever you're involved in a news story and you see the news reported, you go, "Oh, this is complete."
Gelman. That's what's his face. That's Crichton calling it the Gelman amnesia effect. You read this page of the paper, and
then you turn the page.
It's made up.
Yeah, and then you read the next article and you think, "Oh, this is
amazing." Oh my God, you believe complete. Yeah, it's complete. You believe
and my dad was a politician growing up, so I had firsthand knowledge of like this is what happened, this is what the news reported, and it was like, well, that's not even
close.
Kind of like
not even a distant relative.
Yeah. So that was it was always tough to like reading stories and always trying to read between the lines. And it's also, when dealing with people, they tell you this poor sob story about what they did. And as they're telling it, I'm like deconstructing it going, oh, you were a jerk to that person. And that's why they did that to you. Not your sob story is falling apart in front of me.
It's so funny you're talking about this. And Jay, this might be, I got to think about this for next time. This is something human beings' ability, our ability, any man ability to cipher bullshit. When you've got the right lens and maybe the right skeptical attitude towards it, it's amazing how good it's at the basis of the jury system. The entire basis of the jury system is that you can't fool 12 people. If you put on your story, when you're bullshitting and you did something wrong, you're not going to fool 12 people.
Well, the thing is, like there was about like how to spot a liar. The majority of liars are terrible. Like we all lie like 3-year-olds. We all lie like we're like we always think we're crafty, and it's not that people it's not that they believe our lies. It's that they just don't call us out on it. Right. Hey, I'm allowing you to save face, and fortunately / unfortunately, with like as many autistic kids as there are being born now, when someone's lying, the autistic kid just goes, no. And everybody's like, what? But civility is like, F your civility, you're lying. And it's not really that hard to detect. The lies we believe. I was joking when you're like, how you detect a lie. I'm like, I'm a great lie detector unless a hot blonde with a great butt's telling it. And then I'll man, hook, line, and sucker every time.
Right. We all fall for that too.
Right.
So this will be interesting. It comes down to it's running alongside something I'm working on right now. I've been writing, and Jay was interested in this plausible reasoning stuff that I've been doing. I'm doing a course and kind of writing it out on my Substack about plausible reasoning, and kind of taking a bunch of stuff Greg did on broken science, but applying it to the law. And it runs along that same idea that, a lot of life is a long stretch of conditional probabilities, and we're all doing assessments, whether, you're constantly updating your models. And that includes of your friends and other people, of your spouse. If they cheat on you, believe me, you're going to do an update to you find out they're cheating on you. You're going to do an update to your model. It's going to change everything. And a lot of that is that it's all built on kind of making, judgments with limited information. But we've got more info now, and we're going to keep getting more on the CIA. I think it's going to wind up. I think this is the beginning of. I'm going to take Jeff Childers' view that all of this exposure, all this sunlight, is intended to limit, like USAID. That's long been known to be the CIA's money, slush fund, and so that's all getting busted up. And can't help but wonder if, Trump is carrying out what was JFK's. Stated intent of going to scatter the agency to the winds, but they could see themselves being radically restructured and downsized, and probably deservedly so, given what these files are showing. Holy shit!
Well, it's one of those things where last week we talked a little bit about Bahalji, and
Yeah.
during the Trump's first term, he had been floated around as like, "Hey, would you like to be the head of the FDA?" And his response was, "No, I would not. If you would like to set up a new organization that could
Well,
compete with or replace the FDA, certainly, but I don't have any interest in becoming part of that organization." You know, the CIA didn't jump forth fully formed into the organization it was today. It had a massive, I think, like a 30% haircut on personnel back in the Carter administration, when
something like that,
all
yeah.
like all of the Middle East and Asia was exposed, rather than apologize to Iran for the CIA replacing their Shah.
Yep.
Also kind of rude on our part, but
Rude.
rude.
I mean, to say the least.
Right. And get you kicked right out of a dinner party. That, you know, when it was politically expedient for the U.S. to not apologize to Iran, we had no problem burning down 30% of the CIA.
Yeah, well, you know, it's
now
funny.
now what we have is like a disagreement over what is your mission.
Yeah.
Like, why are we doing these things?
Right. Why? Well, you know what's interesting. You say that with Iran, and you look elsewhere. You can find on the internet. You look around, like look at the Middle East and all Arab nations in the 1960s, and then look at them now.
They're way more progressive than
Yeah, girls were going to university in Afghanistan in the 1970s.
Right. Yes.
Kabul was
wearing miniskirts.
Yeah, I mean, it was jeans. You know,
Yes.
you can find that Libya everywhere.
Jordan was
very cosmopolitan, and so at some point you start to realize, like, you look at all the places where the CIA and the U.S. government has meddled, and that has led to this fundamentalist kind of Wahhabist thing. And I mean, you just can't help but see all of it as like 9/11 is blowback for us fucking around with the Russian. You know what I mean? Like, you suddenly start going, you know, this whole idea of doing good and like you're doing bad, but it's really for the good. It starts to sound like you're just telling yourself a story.
I think every organization needs a hatchet man. That one of my personal pet peeves is that people who are fighting for the honest and the good always think that the honest and the good is just going to win on its own. I mean, the Republicans have largely been the Washington Generals of politics for the last 40 years, because they're like, oh, no, we're righteous and we're telling the truth. And it's like, well, you know, sometimes you have to fight hard, fight dirty.
That to me looks like, no, I don't believe that anymore. Now, you know what it looks like to me? It looks like more like you said, Washington Generals. But think about what that means. The Washington Generals are in on it.
Yes.
They're getting paid to pretend to be the opposition.
Correct.
And I think that's you. I think the look at us, we're principled, and that's why we keep getting steamrolled by the evil Team Blue is just the cover story for, hey, we're all pigs with our noses in the trough. And I think that's what we're finding out. I mean, I think that's what this whole, you know, Trump v. deep state is about. There's a kind of uniparty kind of, you know, and the agency, and it's all part of it. That whole all of DC is in on it. You know what I mean? It's like
I would also say the
part of this game.
To reinforce your point, I think the thing that the bureaucrats, the CIA, the State Department, the thing that they hate about Trump is he says explicitly what he wants, and then it works.
Yeah,
and they're so used to playing games about like, we'll allude to what you want. We're going to be very tasteful about it. We're not going to say anything directly. You're not going to say anything back directly. It'll be so oblique that nobody will know, and then nothing will actually happen for 10 years. And he just comes in and goes, hey, get the cartels under control, stop the fentanyl, take your immigrants back, or there's going to be a 25% tariff. They go, whoa.
Yeah.
You can't talk to people like that.
Yeah, he's not a consensus builder. Not this time around. Not this time around. And I don't think this is a 4-year job. So it'll be interesting to see how long. Like, can the agency fend him off? Can they, long enough? Can they stall long enough that he's gone, and then can they co-opt, the presumptive, JD Vance. I don't know. We'll see. But it's interesting to watch. It's a historic time. We're watching something fascinating. And I'll just end by saying this. I was in the Marine Corps, but if it came out that, and I worked with the agency too, but if it came out that the Marine Corps was like, there was just this disproportionate number of Marines who were out killing and raping and pillaging, and somebody was like, and could tie it to like the organization itself, you would have to, if you said you were a serious person, you'd have to be like, burn it to the ground.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it has to go. To the extent that it's like eating, it's like having a pet tiger.
Yeah.
And when it starts eating your kids, it's got to go.
It's got to go. The fact that we did not send more priests to prison and didn't seize their assets for the victims is deeply troubling to me, and I would like to see more justice done for everyone.
For sure, that you've got to say that the whole idea that it wasn't institutional, and it was obviously known at the highest levels and all that stuff. So the fact that there weren't institutional level penalties, suggests, you know what I mean? Like, there should have been some cracking, absolute gobsmacking kind of judgments or penalties, or people dragged out in irons. You know what I mean? That should have been.
When God himself comes down and says, "Hey, that's enough," that would be good. Until then, keep putting it on.
right. Yeah, until God shows up and says that's too much.
we will lease your church back to you because we own it now.
Yeah. I mean,
and then, by the way, that lease money is going to go to the funds of the victims.
Hey, maybe Trump will come up with a way to do the same thing with the agency. We'll see.
Right.
I think that's all we got, JV. At least until next week. We'll see what tragedies come up in the next week.
Damn it, Dale.